Ladies and gentlemen, it's good to have you here on Lesson 4, Converging Cultures in U.S. History. We're going to start right into looking at the U.S. history from its timeline of prehistory all the way up through the common day. And the first thing we're going to look at is the interaction between the people that lived here in North and South America at the same time of the coming of the Europeans. So that's really what we're going to be starting off with. So the time frame is really prehistory, all the way up until about the year 1520. So before we can really start talking about what happens when the Europeans connect up with the Native Americans, we need to talk about how did people get to the New World to begin with. Well, obviously there were people here when the Europeans came with rich traditions going back hundreds and thousands of years. So how'd they get here? Well, essentially what scientists believe is that they came to the Americas through Asia, and that happened about 15,000 years ago. And it happened through Alaska. Matter of fact, right now, Alaska and Russia are separated by something called the Bering Sea and the Bering Straits. But many thousand years ago, 15,000 years ago, the sea level was lower because of glaciation. And so there was a land bridge that was connected between America and Asia, and that's how people came here. Early North American cultures included the Anasazi, which we're really familiar with in the Southwest, and we had lots of strong trading routes well established before the Europeans arrived. So let's take a look at the Native American cultures that were here when the Europeans arrived. In the West, we had a number of groups focused on the Southwest, the area where we live. The Anasazi were the early groups. Then we had the Hopi, and we had the Navajo, and a number of other groups in our part of the country. In the far northwest, we had fishing folk, and in the far north itself, we had the Inuit cultures, or the Eskimo cultures, in what's Canada today, Canada and Alaska. The Great Plains is the area where we think of when we think of Native Americans in movies and films. It tends to be those horsemen riding across the plains, chasing the buffalo. Those groups, like the Sioux, are certainly in the plains part of the country, the middle part of our country. And then the largest population centers for Native Americans was the eastern part of our country, in green on this map. And that's the first folks that interacted with the Europeans. Also coming together in all of this piece are African cultures. Obviously, African individuals, people of African descent, came to the New World very soon after the Europeans did, mostly as slaves. So it's important that we understand what the background of these folks were. And Africa really was divided. The part of Africa that is connected with with North America, it was divided into two pieces. One was the Islamic nations of North Africa, and then the empires of West Africa, empires like Ghana, Mali, and the Songhai. And we need to recognize that these are groups that were incredibly well developed, had engineering and technological aspects to their cultures that rivaled the Europeans at the time, and were involved with the Europeans based on the gold trade and the slave trade. And so Africa is an important connection with the converging cultures of the New World as well. So why were the Europeans interested in exploration? What were they hoping to get out of it? Well, the first that they were hoping was they really wanted to make sure that they could find new markets for their trade. It's all about money after all, and if they don't have people to buy stuff that they make and can't find places to get the raw materials, chances are they're not going to make money. So trading markets was really important. Also, there was a fascination with the exotic new lands that they were finding, a desire as human beings to look into the unknown. We certainly still have that today, and think about space exploration as kind of what we would do that way. But they were interested in trying to figure out what lie beyond the horizon. And also we had the desire to spread religion to other regions of the world. There was a thought that the Catholic and Protestant nations were doing the native peoples of other parts of the world a favor by sharing their religion with them. So it really comes down to three things: God, glory, and gold. So the voyages to the Americas were many-fold. Lots of different nations were trying to get to Asia, and North and South America happened to be in the way. The Vikings and the Chinese are thought to potentially have explored North America specifically before Columbus did. The Portuguese were a huge trading power, and they focused on traveling to Asia by going around the Horn in Africa. But the Spanish really wanted to get to Asia by going west, and that was the connection that we really see with Columbus that we'll talk about in just a second. The Spanish have really great resources. They're very powerful during this time frame, and they want to focus and expand overseas empires. So when they find North and South America, they have a desire to colonize it and make money off it. Here's a guy we know all about. This is Christopher Columbus. Of course, Christopher Columbus is credited as the person discovering America. We recognize that there was nothing to discover because there were people here to begin with, so you can't discover what's already populated. But he certainly was one of the main early explorers, if not the main European early explorer, to interact with the New World. Really what he was trying to do is get to Asia. The circumference, the size of the Earth was sometimes not known, and so the thought was that it would be quick to go west and get to Asia, and unfortunately North and South America were there in the way. So he bumped up against the West Indies in his trips over in 1492. He's an Italian navigator, and he convinces the Spanish monarchs to fund his journey to try to reach Asia. And he hopes to simplify the spice route and gain an advantage over the Portuguese, and that's really what convinces the monarchs of Spain to fund his voyage. So let's talk a little bit about the voyages of Columbus. He actually made several, but the first one is the most known and important probably, and that's in October of 1492. Columbus lands on the island of Hispaniola, which is today in the West Indies. So if you think about the Dominican Republic and Haiti, that's the part of the world we're talking about. He initially thinks it's part of Asia, and he explores the West Indies and takes some of the natives captive to bring back to Spain to kind of show off. So he's amazed by the fact that they're very, very peaceful, that they don't have the high technology weapons and armaments that the Spanish do, and he wants to share these individuals with the Spanish by bringing them back. So what happens when Columbus returns? Well, when Columbus returns, it becomes obvious that there's this new market, this new place to find incredible raw materials such as gold, and that interests the Spanish. So the Spanish conquistadors want to explore and take control of and essentially colonize much of North and South America. And they do that. They send boat after boat over, armed, and what they try to do is set up colonial administrations. So they set up new little bits of Spain right there in the New World. Unfortunately, as they're doing this and trying to reach their goals in terms of wealth, they take a number of the natives captive and work them to really, really bad. The working and living conditions that the Spanish put the Native Americans under is awful, and many natives die. And that requires a number of slaves from Africa to be brought over, and so now we start the slave trade. European diseases also wipe out a lot of tribes. The Native Americans are not prepared to deal with the diseases brought over by the Europeans, and that oftentimes kills many of them. What are some of the economic impacts of colonization? Now that we have Europeans connected with the native North Americans and the Africans, what's going on with that? Well, we have something called the Columbian Exchange. So gold and silver that's mined in America goes over and makes European nations very wealthy. The European nations develop or take the raw material, make them into finished materials, and send them back to North America. And in the meantime, we're also bringing slaves over to mine the raw materials in North America as well. So that's a little bit about what's going on at this point in the world. This is kind of our first foray into looking at the first little piece of American history. Go ahead and once you're done here, take a look at your reading assignment, and then you'll work your way through to finishing the actual written assignment. Good luck, and give me a holler if you have any questions.